June 1944, northern France. 48 hours after D-Day. The ground still trembles with the aftershocks of the largest amphibious invasion in human history. American boots have barely dried from the blood-soaked waters of Omaha Beach. German commanders scramble through their headquarters, maps sprawled across oak tables, trying to comprehend where the next blow will land. Their intelligence reports are flooding in another massive American division spotted near the Belgian border. Tank tracks, radio chatter, the unmistakable signature of thousands of troops preparing for assault. But there's something that German generals don't know. Something that will make military historians shake their heads in disbelief decades later. That entire division doesn't exist. Welcome to the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The Ghost Army, 1,000 artists, sound engineers, and creative minds who wielded paintbrushes and speakers like weapons of war. Men who discovered that in modern combat, the most powerful weapon isn't always the one that kills, it's the one that deceives. The year is 1944, and America faces an impossible mathematics problem. After 3 years of brutal warfare, the Allies have finally gained a foothold in Europe, but Germany still commands millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and the strategic advantage of defending their own territory. Every Allied advance costs lives, thousands of them. Generals Eisenhower and Bradley stare at casualty reports that read like phone books. They need an edge. They need to make the Germans see threats that don't exist, pull divisions away from real battlefronts, force Hitler's commanders to spread their forces thin across a continent. Enter Colonel Hilton Howell Rayleigh, a man whose resume reads like fiction. Advertising executive journalist. The man who discovered Amelia Earhart and convinced her to fly across the Atlantic. Now, in 1944, he's been given perhaps the strangest assignment in military history. Build an army that doesn't exist. Rayleigh doesn't recruit soldiers. He recruits artists from the fashion houses of New York. He pulls set designers who built Broadway stages from Hollywood studios. He takes sound engineers who created the audio landscapes for epic films. From art schools across America, he gathers painters, sculptors, and illustrators, men who know more about perspective and illusion than ballistics and tactics. Among them, a young artist named Bill Blass, who will later revolutionize American fashion. Ellsworth Kelly, who will become one of the most important abstract painters of the 20th century. Art Kane, who will photograph the most iconic jazz musicians of the 1950s. Men are about to become warriors in the strangest battalion ever assembled. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops officially activates in January 1944. Their training doesn't happen on rifle ranges or obstacle courses. It happens in workshops where engineers teach them to inflate rubber tanks with air compressors. In sound labs where they learn to broadcast pre-recorded audio of armored divisions on the move. In camouflage classes where they study not how to hide, but how to be seen as something they're not. The equipment they receive is revolutionary. Inflatable Sherman tanks that weigh just 85 pounds, but look identical to the real 30-ton behemoths from 300 yards away. Rubber artillery pieces that 2 men can carry but require a crane to move when real. Wooden aircraft that cost $25 to build but look like $50,000 fighter planes from enemy reconnaissance photos. Sound trucks equipped with massive speakers that can project recorded audio tank engines. Troop movements, construction, noise up to 15 miles away. But the most important weapon in their arsenal isn't technology, it's theater. June 8, 1944. 72 hours after the Normandy invasion, the Ghost Army receives its first combat assignment. The real 2nd Armored Division needs to move south, toward the German strongholds blocking the Allied advance. But if German intelligence discovers this movement, they'll reinforce those positions. The solution: the Ghost Army will become the 2nd Armored Division, maintaining the illusion that America's armor is still dug in along the coast. 23-year-old Lieutenant Bob Dahl oversees the deployment of inflatable tanks along hedgerows near the... His hands shake not from fear, but from the absurdity of it all. 6 months ago, he was painting landscapes in Rhode Island. Now he's commanding a squad of artists as they use bicycle pumps to inflate fake Shermans. Make sure the shadows fall correctly, he whispers to his men. Real tanks would cast shadows at this angle with the morning sun. German reconnaissance planes photograph at dawn. They're looking for shadow patterns. The attention to detail borders on obsessive. The artists don't just position the rubber tanks randomly. They study actual armor division, deployments, the spacing between vehicles, the tactical formations, the support equipment that would surround them. They add fake tire tracks in the mud using special rollers. They scatter equipment, empty fuel drums, ammunition crates, supply trucks in patterns that match real military doctrine. Then comes the sonic deception. As darkness falls, soundtracks position themselves in valleys where audio will carry across German lines. At precisely 2,200 hours, speakers crackle to life. The recorded sounds of an armored division echo across the French countryside, tank engines revving, treads clanking against cobblestone, sergeants shouting orders, metal clanging against metal as munitions load. German listening posts pick up every sound. Intelligence officers mark their maps. American armor still positioned along the coast. Meanwhile, 60 miles south, the real 2nd Armored Division rolls toward their objective in complete radio silence. Their engines muffled, their movements covered by the Ghost Army's theatrical performance. The operation succeeds. German divisions remain in place, defending against an army that exists only in imagination and rubber. The real tanks strike where Hitler's generals least expect. The Ghost Army has drawn first blood without firing a single shot. But the Ghost Army's deceptions go far beyond inflatable tanks. Their most sophisticated operations involve what the military calls special effects, a combination of visual, audio, radio, and even atmospheric deception that creates multisensory illusions. The radio deception unit, nicknamed the Wire Operators, runs perhaps the most psychologically complex operation. They don't just send fake messages. They create entirely fictional personalities on the radio waves. Each radio operator develops a unique fist, the distinctive rhythm and pattern with which they tap Morse code. Just as handwriting differs between people, so does radio keying. German intelligence units have files on American radio operators, recognizing individual operators by their transmission style. The Ghost Army studies these patterns obsessively. When they impersonate a division, they don't just send similar messages, they replicate the exact keying rhythm of that division's real operators. Sergeant Harold Dahl, no relation to Lieutenant Bob. Dahl spends hours practicing the fist of a radio operator from the 6th Armored Division. He studies recordings métés, the timing between dots and dashes, even mimics the operator's occasional mistakes. Everyone makes errors, the training manual explains. A transmission that's too perfect is suspicious. When the Ghost Army impersonates a unit, their radio operators broadcast mundane traffic supply requests, weather reports, routine position updates. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that suggests anything important, because that's exactly what real units broadcast 99% of the time. The goal isn't to feed Germans false intelligence about attacks. The goal is to make Germans believe an entire division exists in a location where it doesn't. The atmospheric deception might be the most ingenious element. The Ghost Army doesn't just look and sound like a real division. They create the social footprint. When they set up near French towns, soldiers visit local cafes wearing the patches of the division they're impersonating. They pay for wine with military script that bears unit numbers. They talk loudly, deliberately, carelessly about their unit and where it might be heading. They know that French civilians talk and that German intelligence networks listen. In one operation, Ghost Army soldiers stage an elaborate charade in a Luxembourg bar, wearing the insignia of the 5th Armored Division. They drink heavily and argue loudly about their upcoming push toward Metz. They make sure German sympathizers overhear every word. Within 48 hours, German divisions redeployed to defend Metz. The real 5th Armored Division attacks 40 miles north, encountering minimal resistance. September 1944, the Moselle River, eastern France. The war has shifted. Allied forces race across France, pursuing a crumbling German army. But near the German border, resistance stiffens. The Wehrmacht falls back to prepared defensive positions, and every mile forward costs Allied lives. General Georges S. Patin, a man not known for subtlety or appreciation of archer quests, the Ghost Army personally. Patton's 3rd Army needs to cross the Moselle River, but German defenders have fortified the eastern bank. Intelligence suggests, at least for German divisions guard the crossing points, a frontal assault would be suicide. But if those German divisions could be pulled away, drawn toward a phantom threat elsewhere, the Ghost Army receives the assignment. Make the Germans believe that Patton's entire 3rd Army is preparing to cross 10 miles south of the actual crossing point. This will be their largest operation yet. Over 600 Ghost Army soldiers deployed to create the illusion of 30,000 troops preparing for assault. The timeline is brutal. They have 72 hours to construct an entire phantom army. Private Arthur Shilstone, a 24-year-old illustrator from New York, leads a team positioning inflatable tanks along ridge. The Germans have observation posts on the high ground across the river. His commander explains, "We want them to see these tanks. Make sure they're visible, but not suspiciously visible." It's a delicate balance. Too hidden, and the deception fails. Too obvious, and the Germans smell a trap. The sonic deception team faces their greatest challenge. They need to simulate not just a division, but an entire army corps preparing for river assault. Sound engineer Lieutenant John Walker coordinates multiple sound trucks to create a symphony of military preparation. At designated times, different trucks, broadcasts, different sound bridging equipment being assembled, amphibious vehicles running engine tests, engineering units conducting demolition training. Layer it, Walker instructs his operators. Real military operations don't happen in neat sequences. Everything overlaps. Chaos is authentic. The radio deception reaches new levels of complexity. For 3 days, Ghost Army radio operators maintain constant chatter, simulating the communications of an entire army preparing for assault. They broadcast engineering requests for bridging equipment, medical units requesting additional field hospitals, chaplains scheduling services for troops about to enter combat, supply officers coordinating ammunition deliveries. Meanwhile, the real Third Army assembles 10 miles north in complete radio silence. On September 14th, at 0300 hours, Patton's forces launch the actual crossing. German artillery opens fire, but every gun is aimed at the Phantom Army 10 miles south. By the time German commanders realize the deception, American troops have secured the eastern bank. The casualty estimates are staggering. Military analysts later calculate that the Ghost Army operation saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives in that single campaign. Patton, never one for flowery praise, sends a simple message to the 23rd, "Job well done." But the Ghost Army's operations carry immense risk. These artists and engineers operate miles ahead of actual front lines, often with minimal protection. If German forces discover the deception and attack, the Ghost Army has no real armor, no artillery, no heavy weapons to defend themselves. They carry rifles and sidearms, but their primary defense is speed inflate the deceptions, broadcast the illusions, then disappear before anyone investigates too closely. October 1944, the Siegfried Line, German border. The Ghost Army establishes a phantom armored division near the German border, trying to draw attention away from the actual offensive. Private Harold Lehner, a 22-year-old from Philadelphia, positions inflatable artillery pieces. When he hears the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery, the Germans have spotted them. Shells crash into the false army. Inflatable tanks explode not with the violence of real armor, but with a pathetic hiss of rubber. The deception is collapsing. "Pack it up, everyone, to the trucks." Lieutenant Dick Syracuse screams. The Ghost Army has practiced this moment. Every operation includes detailed evacuation plans, but practice doesn't account for the terror of shells exploding around you, the confusion of smoke and noise, the knowledge that if the Germans overrun your position, they'll discover not a real military unit, but a theater troupe with air compressors and sound equipment. The Ghost Army escapes with minutes to spare. They lose equipment on dozens of inflatable tanks. Several sound trucks spot no lives. That night, back at their base, 22-year-old Private Bill Blast sits in his tent, hands still shaking, and writes in his diary, "Today I almost died defending a rubber tank. War is insane." Between June 1944 and the war's end, the Ghost Army conducts more than 20 major operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. They impersonate more than a dozen real divisions. They create phantom armies that exist only in German intelligence reports. The statistics are remarkable. 1,100 men impersonating forces of up to 30,000 troops, more than 600 inflatable tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft-deployed sound equipment capable of projecting audio. 15 miles, 20 major tactical deceptions conducted, thousands of hours of fake radio traffic broadcast. Conservative estimates between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives saved, but perhaps their most significant contribution isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in psychology. The Ghost Army represents a fundamental shift in military thinking. 4 millennia warfare focused on killing enemy soldiers and destroying enemy equipment. Victory came through violence. But the Ghost Army proves that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that makes the enemy see what isn't there. Fear what doesn't exist, defend against threats that are nothing but rubber and sound waves. They turned warfare into theater, battlefields into stages, and in doing so, they saved thousands of lives. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders. The Ghost Army gathers in a muddy field somewhere in Germany. These artists who became soldiers, these creators who learned to deceive, share one final moment before returning to civilian life. Many will return to their art. Bill Blass will transform American fashion, his designs gracing runways worldwide. Ellsworth Kelly will create abstract paintings that hang in museums globally. Art Kane will photograph the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century, but none of them will talk about their war service. The Ghost Army remains classified top secret for decades. At parties, when people ask what they did during the war, these men mumble vague answers about special units and change the subject. The military understands the value of deception. If enemies know your tricks, those tricks become useless. So the Ghost Army disappears into classified archives, their story locked away. It isn't until 1996, more than 50 years after the war, that documents finally Suddenly, the world learns about the 1,000 artists who wielded paintbrushes like rifles, who turned the battlefield into the greatest theater production in history. By then, many Ghost Army veterans have died, taking their stories with them. But those who remain finally speak. In documentaries and interviews, these elderly men, now painters, designers, professors, describe the strangest combat unit ever assembled. We saved lives by pretending, one veteran explains. We created armies that didn't exist, convinced generals to fear ghosts, turned warfare into illusion, and somehow, impossibly, it worked. The legacy today: military deception remains a critical component of modern warfare. Electronic warfare units create false radar signatures. Cyber operations spread disinformation across digital networks. Special forces deploy decoy equipment to confuse enemy surveillance. All of it traces back to those artists in France, inflating rubber tanks with bicycle pumps, broadcasting recorded sounds of armies that didn't exist. The Ghost Army proved that in war, perception can be as powerful as reality, that sometimes the best way to win a battle is to make your enemy fight the wrong battle in the wrong place against the wrong army. They transformed creativity into strategy, art into weaponry, imagination into survival, and in doing so, they saved thousands of lives not by taking them, but by fooling those who would. The Ghost Army remains one of World War II's most remarkable stories. Not because of the battles they fought none, but because of the battles they prevented, the lives they saved, the proof they offered that even in humanity's darkest hours, creativity and intelligence can triumph over brute force. In the end, that might be the Ghost Army's greatest legacy, the reminder that the human mind, armed with imagination and courage, remains the most powerful weapon ever created. As one Ghost Army veteran said in his final interview before passing away, "We didn't fire bullets, we fired ideas, and somehow that was enough."